Welcome to another edition of The Leaders. I'm Yuli Ismartono from Asiaviews. We're in Singapore to have a dialogue with Kishore Mahbubani. Mr. Mahbubani is Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. He began his career as a diplomat, joining the Foreign Service in 1971 and ending as Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations in 2002, where he served as president of the Security Council. In between, he was posted to Cambodia and Malaysia. He is the author of 2 books, Can Asians Think? And the just published Beyond the Age of Innocence, Rebuilding Trust Between America and the World. Mr. Mahbubani received his master's degree in philosophy in 1976 from Dalhousie University in Canada and an honorary doctorate in 1995. Professor Mahbubani, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Let me start by asking the motive behind your well-known, must-read but provocative book, Can Asians Think?
Well, the motivation was very simple, Asians would like to believe that they're now successful, but I think that they need to think a bit harder about their future prospects, because if you look back at what Asia has accomplished over the last 1,000 years, it hasn't been a great story, because in the year 1000, Asia was up here, Europe was here, and North America had not been discovered. In the year 2000, North America is here, Europe is here, and Asia is very low. So the question that the Asians need to ask themselves in a very profound fashion is how they lost so many centuries of development. Why is it when the West began to take off in the 17th century, 18th century, and even the 19th century, Asian countries did not copy or emulate the best practices of the West? And it only took the second half of the 20th century, in fact only the last 2 decades of the 20th century, that you've seen the Asian countries emerging and taking off. I'm optimistic about Asia's future, but I think we have better grounds for optimism if the Asians do some very hard and very tough-minded reflection on what went wrong in these past few centuries, because if you do not figure out all the causes of what went wrong, the danger is that it might happen again. That's why I wrote the book, Can Asians Think? To force Asians to reflect very hard on their condition and what they did wrong and how they can make it right this time.
But aren't you seeing a change, a kind of a renaissance right now?
I think you're seeing the beginnings of a renaissance, but I think the Asian countries have so far done the easy things. The first phase of economic development is often the easiest phase. You can pluck the low-lying fruits, like for example, you can bring in foreign investment with low wages and then export to the developed markets and so on and so forth. But as you move up the development ladder, and as you have to compete with the developed societies, whether in America or Western Europe, you have to show the same capacity for critical thinking that has enabled these societies to propel forward. And in many Asian societies today, there's so many taboo subjects. You can't discuss things openly and critically. And that I see as a great weakness, remaining weakness of Asian societies. And I hope, again, with my book, Can Asians Think? I'm forcing Asians to ask hard questions. To think very hard and critically about themselves. And I don't think they've arrived at all.
Do you think this is cultural? How can this change? Your book will help, certainly, but what must we do to bring about this kind of change?
I think we do not have to reinvent the wheel. Fortunately for us, other societies have succeeded already, and we can learn from the best practices of other societies. And this is happening. China and India, for example, are learning to apply what I call the pillars of Western wisdom. free market economics, for example, are being implemented, emphasis on education, emphasis on rule of law, all these are being gradually implemented. But they need to be implemented more systematically. And I think the more we can learn from the developed societies and what to do right, the faster we can progress. Take rule of law, for example. Okay, I see that as being quite fundamental. It's important that there not be any segment of society, especially the rich and powerful elite. As you know, look at Indonesia, for example. There was a time when President Suharto and his family, were immune from any kind of legal process, and that's not healthy for any society. Even the highest person in the land, like in America, the President of America, is not immune from the rule of law. In the same way, the leaders of Asian countries, all Asian countries, should also not be immune from the rule of law, and and they should implement that to ensure that societies move forward.
Again, I bring up the question of culture, because a lot of people say these are the remnants of a long-standing feudalism that exists in many Asian countries. So how can we change this? Do we need a particular system of education, perhaps? Or?
See, I'm glad you brought up the word feudalism, because I think that's the critical word, feudalism. What you have in Asian societies are the external trappings of modernity. I mean, you have a parliament, you have courts, but the culture is very feudal. And it's very, I mean, one of the saddest countries in Southeast Asia, for example, is the Philippines. Now, Philippines, on the surface, is openly democratic and has the rule of law, but as in terms of its culture, it's still very feudal, with a few families in many ways still controlling the wealth of the country, and the people at the very bottom have no avenue to grow and develop except to go overseas and work as foreign workers. Whereas once you defeudalize the societies like India is doing, for example, I think it's quite amazing to see the people from the untouchable caste in India, like this man Narendra Yadav, becoming the chief economist of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, all his ancestors, the only thing they could do was to sweep the streets, and they were not even allowed to touch or shake hands with people in other classes. Now, India's capacity to get rid of the feudal mindset is liberating enormous reserves of energy within the Indian body politic, and also ensuring that the brain power that India had in the lower caste, which was lost, is now being used to develop the country. So in the same way, all Southeast Asian societies must get rid of this feudal mentality and see the lower classes not as liabilities to their societies, but as assets, because these are reserve pools of brain power that have not been used by the societies for their development. But to see that, you have to get rid of the feudal mindset that says only people in the upper class can think. Actually, the people in the bottom classes can think as well as the people in the top classes too.